All right, new this morning, a new forecast from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office shows the federal deficit surging over the next decade. The major reason, the president's huge tax and spending legislation that he calls big and beautiful. Let's get right to CNN reporter Matt Egan for all of this. It gets pretty bad in a few years.
Yeah, look, it's a mess when you look at the federal budget, and the CBO says that the big, beautiful bill from the president is going to make matters even worse. So the CBO downgraded its forecast, warning that deficits over the next decade will be $1.4 trillion higher than previously estimated. Why? Well, the big, beautiful bill, that alone is expected to add $4.7 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. Almost $5 trillion from that legislation alone. Another $500 billion for immigration-related policies. Now, the CBO does give credit for tariffs. $3 trillion of revenue coming in from tariffs. And yet, that's not nearly enough to pay for the other policies, especially the tax bill. And also, let's remember, this is assuming tariff policy stays in place for a decade. Lately, it feels like tariffs don't stay in place for a month, but even still, it's going to not be enough to cover all these other costs. Now, here's the thing. It's getting increasingly expensive to finance America's mountain of debt. The CBO expects the U.S. government this fiscal year alone to spend $1 trillion just on interest. John, that's about $3,000 per U.S. resident. And what's really striking is that's well ahead of the $885 billion that's being spent on defense. So more on interest than on defense. And one way to measure how big of a fiscal mess this is to look at the national debt relative to the size of the economy.
And that's what matters. Honestly, that's what most economists say. You want to take the debt as a percentage of GDP.
Because it's all relative, right? And look at this. It's clearly going in the wrong direction. That dotted line is where we are right now. The CBO is projecting that debt to GDP is going to surpass the prior record of 106% that was set back in 1946 after World War II, and just keep going well above 120% by 2036. Now, one of the things that gets lost in the conversation here is that running high deficits, right, borrowing aggressively, that's something that traditionally Washington would only do in really bad economic times, in some sort of a crisis, in a war. But it's happening now under Republicans and Democrats, even though we're not dealing with any of those emergencies. And the CBO director, Phil Swagel, he put out a statement and he said that given how low unemployment is right now, these sustained large deficits are, quote, historically unusual. And he added that America's budget path is, quote, not sustainable.
Yeah, you don't want these types of deficits in relative good times, because then what happens in the bad ones?
Exactly.
Matt Egan, thank you for this reporting.
Thanks, John.
That is a steep curve.
It is.